The silence in the grand mansion was eerie, almost as if it knew what was to come. It was August 16, 1977, and the sun was just beginning to rise over Graceland. Inside, a young woman named Alicia Kerwin was pacing the halls, her mind racing. She had only met Elvis Presley a few months ago, but the impact he had on her life was unforgettable. She had seen the man behind the legend, and it was a side few ever got to see. Alicia was a 20-year-old blackjack dealer from Memphis, a far cry from the world of fame and fortune that Elvis inhabited. But in the spring of 1977, her life took an unexpected turn. She had been invited to Graceland by a mutual friend, and that night, she met Elvis. He was different from what she had imagined. He was heavy, his speech slow, but there was a gentleness about him that drew her in. They talked for hours, and he opened up about his troubles with his girlfriend, Ginger Alden. Alicia could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Their relationship developed quickly, and before she knew it, Elvis had invited her to Las Vegas. It was a whirlwind of luxury and excess, but it was also a glimpse into the dark side of fame. Alicia saw the pill bottles strewn around his room, the constant presence of Dr. Elias Gaynham, and the sycophantic behavior of Elvis's entourage. When Elvis laughed, everyone laughed, even if they didn't find it funny. It was a bizarre world, and Alicia felt out of place, but Elvis appreciated her honesty. She didn't cater to his every whim, and he respected that. They went to Palm Springs, where Elvis bought her a car. It was a generous gesture, but it also made her realize the depth of his need for companionship. He was a man who had everything but felt alone. Back in Memphis, the reality of their relationship sunk in. Alicia was a young woman with her own life, and the idea of being with Elvis was overwhelming. She tried to break it off, but he wouldn't let her go. He called her, begged her to come see him, and she found herself at Graceland again. This time he was different. He was depressed, withdrawn, and desperate for someone to understand him. The last time Alicia saw Elvis, he was in a somber mood. He talked about how he wished he could go out like a normal person, but he couldn't. He was trapped in a gilded cage, a prisoner of his own fame. She read to him until he fell asleep, and as she left, she knew that something was deeply wrong. Alicia never forgot those moments, the glimpses into the life of a man who was both larger than life and tragically human. As the sun rose on that fateful August morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing the end of an era, but the world was about to learn the truth. The man behind the legend, the king of rock and roll, was about to leave the stage forever, and the questions would begin. After Hutchinson turned off the tape recorder, Alicia began to sob. She felt a mix of relief and sadness, knowing that the Memphis investigators were too polite to ask the question she had been dreading. Despite spending several nights with Elvis, she admitted, they never had sexual relations. And you know what? Hutchinson said later, "We believed that little girl. We believed everything she told us was sincere and honest." But Alicia's credibility wasn't the only reason Hutchinson and his team trusted her. They had also found some important evidence. A few months before Elvis's death, a medical bag belonging to Dr. George Nishapoulos, Elvis's doctor, was stolen from his Mercedes. The bag was later recovered by Metro Narcotics officers, but before it was returned, Detective Mary Ann Case made copies of the documents inside. One of these documents showed that Nishapoulos was giving Elvis daily doses of testosterone, a male hormone often used to treat impotence. The documents, known as protocols, were written in Nishapoulos's handwriting. They detailed the drugs Elvis was to receive at different times of the day, especially during his tours. For example, around 3 p.m., when Elvis usually woke up, he would get a voice shot, vitamins, medication for dizziness, a laxative, appetite suppressants, and testosterone. Just before his performances, he would receive more drugs, including amphetamines and painkillers. After his shows, he would get pills to lower his blood pressure, tranquilizers, and sedatives. Even before bed, he would take more sedatives to help him sleep. If he was still restless, he would get even more drugs. Hutchinson, McGriff, and Armstead left the Las Vegas Police Department at the same time as Alicia. They were determined to find out more about Elvis's death. One question still nagged at Hutchinson, who ordered the maids to clean the bathroom at Graceland after Elvis's body was taken away. Only 3 people had the authority to give that order: Vernon Presley, Joe Esposito, and Aunt Delta Me Biggs. Vernon was in poor health at the time, and Joe was with the ambulance at the hospital. This left Aunt Delta, who was known to be strict and feared by the maids. Although Hutchinson suspected her, he couldn't prove it. By April 1980, the Shelby County grand jury had heard more witnesses and was getting closer to indicting Dr. Nishapoulos. Hutchinson was convinced that Elvis was a serious drug addict and that drugs had killed him. He believed that fame and money had made it difficult to get to the truth, but he was determined to see justice done. On May 16, 1980, the grand jury indicted Dr. George Nishapoulos. The trial was set to begin on September 29, 1981, but Judge Bernie Weinman, who was setting the date, realized it was Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. He quickly rescheduled the trial for the next day to avoid a conflict. Judge Weinman was known for his indecisive and often confusing manner. He would ramble and mumble, leaving lawyers and the public puzzled. He was also known for calling bench conferences to discuss disputes and avoid media attention, but these discussions were never made public. To help navigate the trial, Dr. Nishapoulos hired James Neal, a famous lawyer from Nashville who had also been a Watergate prosecutor. Neal was initially reluctant to take the case, but agreed when he heard the substantial fee. He was known for his thorough preparation and professional demeanor, though he wasn't known for his flashy courtroom style. Before the trial began, Larry Hutchinson received an anonymous call from a woman who claimed to be a nurse. She said her husband had attended a meeting where prominent Memphis citizens, including a judge and other lawyers, were raising money to hire a hitman from Houston to kill Hutchinson. Hutchinson took this threat seriously and took extra precautions, such as checking his car and arming himself. The prosecution was led by Jewett Miller, a tough and experienced prosecutor. He was known for his no-nonsense approach and his strong beliefs about the dangers of drug abuse. However, his aggressive style wasn't always the best fit for this case. Judge Weinman ruled that the toxicology report from Elvis's autopsy could be used to show what drugs were in his system at the time of his death, but not to determine the cause of death. This decision was crucial for the trial. Jury selection took 2 weeks, and the final panel was made up of ordinary people from various backgrounds, including a grocery cashier, a waitress, and a hardware store manager. The trial would be a long and complex process, but the jury would have to decide whether Dr. Nishapoulos had overprescribed drugs and whether his actions were criminal. In his opening statement, Miller talked about the accepted standards of medical practice and how Nishapoulos had clearly crossed the line. He presented evidence showing the increasing number of drugs Elvis was receiving as his addiction worsened. On the other hand, Jim Neal argued that Nishapoulos' intentions were good, and that he was trying to help his patients, including Elvis. The first witness for the state was Robert Muehlberger, a handwriting expert. He testified that all the prescriptions, except for a few altered ones for Jerry Lee Lewis, were written and signed by Nishapoulos. When asked about a handwriting sample Nishapoulos had provided, Muehlberger replied, "2020 sucks." As the trial progressed, the focus would often shift to Elvis's celebrity status and the unique challenges of treating a famous patient with drug addiction. The case was more than just a legal battle. It was a reflection of the broader issues of fame, addiction, and the responsibilities of medical professionals. During a break in the courtroom, James Neal was grumbling about how Miller had surprised him with Nishapoulos' inappropriate comments. "It was a cheap shot," Neal muttered to himself. The trial then called Jack Kirsch to the stand. Kirsch was the pharmacist who had filled most of Elvis Presley's prescriptions. In April 1980, Kirsch had lost his pharmacist's license for a year and admitted to unprofessional conduct for giving Elvis a large variety of drugs without proper prescriptions. Kirsch confirmed that about 50 prescriptions were called in by phone by Nishapoulos. When Neal asked Kirsch about Nishapoulos' efforts to control Elvis's drug use, Miller objected, but Judge Weinman allowed Kirsch to answer, ruling that he was qualified to speak about Nishapoulos' state of mind. Neal asked Kirsch, "Isn't it true that Nishapoulos had to intercept drugs that others were giving to Elvis?" "Yes, sir," Kirsch replied. "Did he ever bring drugs to you and ask you to identify them?" "Yes, he did." "What kinds of drugs were they?" Kirsch listed a mix of uppers and downers, adding, "Some of them, I had no idea what they were." Many of the prosecution's witnesses were reluctant to testify, like Marty Lacker. Lacker regretted that his book, Elvis, Portrait of a Friend, revealed his own drug dependency. The book led investigators to find prescriptions showing that Nishopoulos had given Lacker 1,745 Placidil pills between December 1975 and October 1976, which is more than 5 doses a day. Despite this, Lacker insisted, "I really don't appreciate being called a drug addict. All I did was take pills to sleep." Lacker's wife, Patsy, was more honest about the severity of the situation. "I once asked Nishopoulos to stop giving Marty sleeping pills. He just turned and walked away without saying anything." Elvis's cousin and longtime bookkeeper, Patsy Gamble, identified canceled checks showing that Nishopoulos was paid $800 a day while on tour with Elvis. The checks also showed that Elvis's drug bills were increasing, and his handwriting was deteriorating to that of a child. Patsy noted that Elvis became more withdrawn, spending less time out and more time at home. The prosecution then presented the toxicology report from Bioscience Laboratories and its chief toxicologist, Dr. Norman Weissman. Weissman was ready to share the full autopsy details, which had been kept secret. Reporters leaned forward, eager to learn the truth. Weissman testified that Elvis had 14 different drugs in his system, including 3 metabolites, and that he had never seen such a high number of drugs in a single case. 2 drugs, codeine and methaqualone, were above therapeutic levels, with codeine being 10 times higher than normal. However, Judge Weinman cut the direct examination short, ruling that Weissman's testimony about the drug's effects on Elvis's death was irrelevant. Even the effects on a human body, not specifically Elvis's, were inadmissible. Weissman was a biochemist, not a medical doctor, the judge noted. The prosecution then called Dr. Eric Muirhead, a medical doctor and expert on hypertensive heart disease. Muirhead was the first to sign the suppressed autopsy report. However, Judge Weinman limited his testimony to confirming that samples from Elvis's body were sent to Bioscience, and that no stomach contents were included due to a mistake in the emergency room. Muirhead was not allowed to discuss the results or the cause of death. At this point, the trial shifted focus from Elvis's death to Nishopoulos' overprescribing practices. The trial became more tedious as prosecutors called drug treatment specialists and internists to explain why Nishopoulos' methods were substandard. This gave Neil a chance to challenge the experts and speed up the trial. One of the best expert witnesses was Dr. David Knott, a drug treatment specialist who had treated both Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis. Knott was initially reluctant to testify, but was forced by a court order. He testified that Nishopoulos was trying to help Elvis and Lewis get off drugs, but both needed detoxification due to their recreational polypharmacy. Knott was surprised by the large number of drugs Nishopoulos had prescribed to Elvis. On cross-examination, Neil asked Knott if he believed Nishopoulos was trying to help his patients. "Yes, I did," Knott replied, emphasizing that Nishopoulos was not just supplying drugs, but trying to manage addiction. Dr. William Lerner, a drug rehabilitation expert, described a 3-step approach to treating drug addiction. However, his testimony became less impactful as Neil challenged his credentials, naming numerous medical journals and asking if Lerner had contributed to any. The courtroom erupted in laughter as Lerner struggled to remember. The prosecution called 5 Memphis physicians to testify about the poor quality of Nishopoulos' methods. Dr. Alvin Cummins described the amounts and combinations of drugs as outrageous and dangerous. However, the prosecution agreed to stipulate that the other physicians would support Cummins' testimony, which weakened their case. When the prosecution rested, Neil pointed out that the state had not called Linda Thompson to testify. Neil argued that this was prosecutorial misconduct, but Judge Weinman denied the request. Thompson was ordered to stay in Tennessee and be available if needed. The defense's case largely repeated what had been presented in the 1980 Medical Board hearing. Dr. Walter Hoffman and Al Strada testified about Nishopoulos' compassion and efforts to help problem patients. Dr. Forrest Tennant, a dynamic witness from Los Angeles, testified that drug maintenance was a valid medical practice for keeping patients functional, especially in cases like Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis. Nishopoulos himself testified calmly, declaring that his goal was always to help his patients. "I did the best I could," he said. On cross-examination, Miller's aggressive style backfired. Instead of making Nishapoulos look foolish, it made him appear as a beleaguered physician. The powerful evidence against Nishapoulos, including the stack of prescriptions and the drug protocol in his own handwriting, was overshadowed by Miller's bombast. In the end, Jim Neal's portrayal of George C. Nishapoulos as a Good Samaritan resonated with the jury. Nishapoulos was acquitted on all counts. After the trial, Nishapoulos told American Medical News, "I felt that I did a very poor job during my 1980 trial before the medical board. Had the criminal trial been held first and I had been acquitted, I'm sure the medical board thing would have been forgotten. As it worked out, it was double jeopardy." Elvis Presley was always trying to control things that were hard to control: his age, his drug problems, his public image, and what the press said about him. He and his team of spokespeople often lied to keep his private life private and to protect his image. But over time, Elvis started to mix up what he thought of himself and what was really happening. He wasn't the type to think deeply about things. He was headstrong and didn't listen to good advice. He lacked the ability to step back and look at himself honestly. When things didn't go his way, he just took more pills to change his reality, but the problems didn't go away. Each year, Elvis changed. His music wasn't as good because he stopped working on it. His money problems made him feel inadequate. He kept eating like a teenager, even though he was getting older, which made him gain weight. His health got worse because of the drugs he was taking. His intestines gave him trouble, and he had issues with impotence. All of this was because of his drug use. The things he thought were helping him were actually hurting him. In 1977, even people who liked Elvis were telling him to take a break. They thought he should stop performing the same old songs and try something new. Watching Elvis perform was like seeing a great baseball player strike out. His fans tried to convince themselves that he was still amazing, but it was hard to ignore the changes. Elvis's entourage didn't ask many questions about why he was in such a bad place. They just kept working for him and collecting their paychecks. After Elvis died, a man named Jerry T. Francisco took control. He was just as headstrong as Elvis and didn't listen to good advice. Francisco defended Dr. Nick, who was Elvis's doctor, even though Dr. Nick had his medical license suspended for not keeping good records. Francisco told people that the press was making things worse by exaggerating the story and jumping to conclusions. At a meeting of the National Association of Medical Examiners, Francisco showed slides and talked about how reporters could be unfair. He said that medical examiners often knew details that weren't important to their job, and sometimes reporters would use those details to make a big story. He asked how much a medical examiner should reveal about a case. If Francisco was trying to protect the Presley family's privacy, he also kept important evidence from the authorities who needed to know about Elvis's drug abuse. If Francisco had acted responsibly, the full autopsy report would have been public, and the right people would have been informed. The press would have reported the facts, and the world would have remembered Elvis as a talented but troubled star. Instead, Francisco tried to close the case quickly and hide the bad news. This made the Presley case a mystery that wouldn't go away. ABC News show 2020 tried to get the full autopsy report, but they faced a lot of resistance. The court ruled that the autopsy wasn't a public record, and ABC decided not to appeal the decision. Later, a writer named Albert Goldman called ABC and asked for a copy of the autopsy. Goldman was writing a book about Elvis and wanted to know if he died from drugs. Goldman's book was controversial and full of rumors, but it didn't have all the facts. Years later, Goldman wrote in Life magazine that he was wrong about some of the things he said. He and a co-writer, David Stanley, suggested that Elvis might have committed suicide, but their theory had many holes. For example, they said Elvis was reading about the Shroud of Turin, but it's more likely he was reading a book about sex and astrology. They also claimed Elvis was worried about a book his bodyguards were writing, but that book had already been out for weeks. The idea that Elvis would plan a suicide in a bathroom didn't make sense, especially considering his love for flashy clothes and grand gestures. The truth about Elvis's death is still a mystery, but one thing is clear: the people in charge didn't handle it well. They kept important information hidden, and this only made the story more complicated. The mysterious death of Elvis Presley has been a topic of endless speculation and debate. Many people, including some close to Elvis, have tried to unravel the secrets behind his sudden passing. One of the most intriguing accounts comes from Dan Warlick, a key figure in the investigation. Back in 1977, when Elvis died, Dan Warlick was an investigator for the Shelby County Medical Examiner's Office. He was one of the first people to arrive at Graceland, Elvis's home, on the morning of August 16th. Warlick's job was to gather evidence and piece together the final moments of Elvis's life. Years later, Warlick would share his insights with journalists Jim Cole and Charlie Thompson. Warlick remembered the chaos and grief at Graceland. The house was a whirlwind of activity, with family, friends, and staff trying to come to terms with the loss. Warlick's first stop was the bathroom where Elvis was found. The room had already been cleaned up, but Warlick noticed a wet spot on the carpet where Elvis's head had rested. He lay down on the carpet, placing his head on the wet spot, and stretched out to see if he could reach the toilet. He couldn't. This led Warlick to believe that Elvis had not simply fallen off the toilet, but had struggled and crawled several feet before he died. Warlick also recalled a raunchy book lying open and face down on the counter, surrounded by knocked-over cologne bottles. This scene suggested to him that Elvis had thrown the book in a moment of distress, likely as he felt the onset of his final moments. Warlick's observations painted a picture of a man in agony, struggling to survive. During the autopsy, Warlick witnessed something that left a lasting impression. Dr. Noel Florendo, one of the pathologists, was shocked to find that Elvis's lower intestine was clogged with hardened fecal material. This severe constipation, Warlick believed, was the result of long-term drug abuse, particularly the use of downers, which had paralyzed Elvis's digestive system. Warlick hypothesized that Elvis had been in tremendous pain, straining to relieve himself. The intense effort could have caused a Valsalva maneuver, a condition where the pressure in the abdomen becomes so high that it restricts blood flow to the heart, leading to cardiac arrest. Warlick's theory was that Elvis's death was neither quick nor painless. He believed that Elvis knew he was dying, and struggled on the floor for some time before he finally succumbed. The drugs, while not the direct cause of death, had played a significant role in weakening Elvis's body and contributing to the fatal event. Warlick's account adds a layer of humanity to the Elvis story, showing a man grappling with the consequences of his lifestyle. It also highlights the importance of looking beyond the headlines and conspiracy theories to understand the complex factors that led to his death. Years after Elvis's passing, the debate over his death continues. Some, like Dr. George Nishapoulos, even hinted at more sensational theories, such as murder. However, Warlick's detailed and reasoned account, based on his first-hand experience, provides a more grounded and plausible explanation of what happened on that fateful day in August 1977. Cole and Warlick were having a heated discussion about Elvis Presley's death. Warlick believed that anaphylactic shock, a severe allergic reaction, was not the cause. He pointed out that Elvis had a history of taking the drugs that showed up in the toxicology tests, which made the anaphylactic shock theory unlikely. Cole, however, was more inclined to believe the theory proposed by Baptist Hospital. He argued that it was supported by every consultant they used. Warlick admitted that his theory wasn't the most glamorous, but was convinced it was the truth. After lunch, Cole asked Warlick about what Francisco's assistants thought of the Valsalva theory, which suggested that Elvis's death was caused by a sudden increase in pressure in the chest. Warlick explained that Jim Bell, one of the assistants, initially liked the theory but changed his mind when Jerry Francisco decided that heart disease was the cause. Warlick found it strange that Francisco never explained where he got the idea of heart disease, and seemed to dismiss Warlick's findings. Warlick also pointed out that Francisco seemed uninterested in the evidence he had gathered at Graceland and during the autopsy. He mentioned that Francisco received calls from Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, which might have influenced his decision. Warlick then presented two more arguments against the Baptist Hospital theory. He noted that a drug death usually doesn't involve thrashing around, and that there had been no rulings of death due to polypharmacy in Shelby County. Cole countered by saying that multiple drug deaths were common among pathologists, and that the idea of a peaceful drug death was a myth. Despite their disagreements, Thompson, Cole, and Warlick agreed to work together and share information. They all believed that drugs played a significant role in Elvis's death, even if they couldn't agree on the exact mechanism. During a visit to Memphis, Thompson and Cole met with Larry Hutchinson and David McGriff to compare notes. McGriff was still working for the Attorney General's office, while Hutchinson had retired but was working part-time as a property room manager. Hutchinson urged Cole to review the tapes and transcripts from the criminal investigation of George Nishapoulos, Elvis's doctor. They met with Attorney General Hugh Stanton, Jr., who agreed that the tapes were public records and that they were entitled to them. Cole and Hutchinson went through dozens of boxes of material, finding plenty of useful information. They listened to tapes and transcribed some that had never been written down. As they delved deeper, they discovered more about Elvis's drug use and the circumstances surrounding his death. Hutchinson, with his detective experience, had a different theory. He believed that Elvis had a history of seizures or blackouts, and that he was found in the plush carpeting, where he had been struggling to get air. Hutchinson thought Elvis might have suffocated on the thick carpet. Thompson and Cole disagreed, but Hutchinson urged them to consider his theory. Just think about it. He was struggling to get air and ended up strangling on the thick carpet pile. Thompson and Cole had been following Dr. John Fiegel, a former associate medical examiner who had transitioned to a law office in Tampa. Fiegel specialized in medical malpractice cases. When Thompson and Cole shared their findings, Fiegel was skeptical of both Warlick's and Hutchinson's theories. He suggested they focus on polypharmacy, a well-documented cause of death involving multiple drugs. Fiegel also pointed out that the idea of a peaceful drug death was a myth, and that the toxicology results clearly indicated a polypharmacy case. The levels of codeine and other drugs in Elvis's system were far above therapeutic levels, and the combination of drugs had a cumulative effect. Thompson visited Bob Cravey, a forensic toxicologist in Orange County, who agreed with Fiegel. Cravey emphasized that the only theory that made sense was polypharmacy. Despite Francisco's ruling, other forensic experts, including Eric Muirhead, disagreed. Muirhead, a respected pathologist, had been in the field for 40 years and specialized in cardiovascular disease. He believed that Francisco's ruling was incorrect and that Elvis died from multiple drug ingestion. The autopsy report, which was eventually made public, confirmed the presence of 14 drugs in Elvis's system, with codeine levels 10 times the therapeutic level. The report also noted that Elvis had liver abnormalities, which likely enhanced the effects of the drugs. Further, the report indicated that Elvis didn't die instantly. There were signs of fluid in the lungs, small hemorrhages, and a bluish condition around the abdomen, all suggesting that he lived for a short time after being stricken. The clincher came from an unlikely source. Elvis's nurse, Marion Koch, and his girlfriend, Linda Thompson, both noted that Elvis was allergic to codeine. He would break out in a rash and have trouble breathing. This information suggested that Elvis might have mistaken codeine for the Dilaudid he requested, leading to a severe allergic reaction. On the night of August 16, 1977, Elvis likely took a large dose of codeine, thinking it was Dilaudid. The allergic reaction caused him to struggle, and he eventually fell forward on the carpet, unable to call for help. Moments later, he was dead. Dr. Muirhead, who had remained silent for nearly 14 years, finally spoke out, confirming that Elvis died from polypharmacy. His public confirmation prompted the Shelby County Commission to reconsider the case, leading to a resolution calling for the state's vital records keeper to reopen the investigation. The year was 1991, and a new inquiry into Elvis Presley's death was brewing. It all started with Marvin Blizzard, a U.S. Navy scientist living in the Washington, D.C. area. Marvin had a personal stake in the matter. For years, he and his family had been disputing the official explanation of how a relative had died in an East Tennessee nursing home. They believed the death was due to neglect or medical incompetence, and they were particularly upset by how the treating physician had filled out the death certificate. Marvin wrote letter after letter to Tennessee officials, calling their explanations bogus and self-serving. But the officials were hesitant to get involved until a state legislator brought the case to the attention of Tennessee Attorney General Charles W. Burson. On January 7, 1991, Burson's office issued an opinion stating that the state registrar had the authority to investigate false and/or misleading statements on death certificates. This authority included the right to inspect confidential medical records, and anyone who withheld these records could be charged with a misdemeanor. This opinion caught the attention of Vasco Smith, a Shelby County Commissioner. Smith had long been dissatisfied with the operation of the medical examiner's office. After reading The Death of Elvis, a book that raised questions about Presley's death, Smith decided to act. He drafted a resolution that applied Burson's opinion to Elvis's case. The resolution pointed out several discrepancies between the autopsy records and the death certificate prepared by Dr. Francisco. For example, the autopsy suggested that Elvis was a victim of polypharmacy, or the use of multiple drugs, while the death certificate listed the cause of death as cardiac arrhythmia. Smith's resolution asked the state registrar to investigate these discrepancies and determine if the death certificate contained any false or misleading information. On April 29, 1991, the resolution passed, and the registrar's office was tasked with examining the case. However, on June 21, 1991, the registrar's office issued a response stating that the Presley death certificate had been reviewed in 1977 and found to be in order. They declined to reopen the case, much to the frustration of Shelby County officials. The registrar's response did not address the specific issues of false or misleading statements, so the county was preparing to take legal action to force the registrar to comply with the resolution. Meanwhile, Graceland, Elvis's estate, was avoiding the issue. Tour guides continued to tell visitors that Elvis died of cardiac arrhythmia, ignoring the growing doubts and questions. The controversy didn't end there. In March 1991, a small obituary in the Memphis press brought back the dark side of Elvis's life. Alicia Kerwin, a former girlfriend of Elvis, was found dead in her Las Vegas apartment. Alicia had been just a teenager when she met Elvis, and she was shocked by the drug-fueled environment at Graceland. She left and eventually settled in Las Vegas, where she worked as a blackjack dealer. Alicia's life took a tragic turn. She was charged with assault after shooting her husband, Tony Castle, in the leg. The wound was superficial, but the incident led to further legal troubles. On March 12, 1991, Alicia was found dead in bed, wearing a red bathrobe. The coroner's report revealed that she had been mixing several prescription drugs, including Valium, Placidil, Elavil, and Sanquin. Her death was ruled as multiple drug toxicity, a stark reminder of the drug problems that had plagued Elvis. The death of Alicia Kerwin added a new layer to the ongoing investigation into Elvis's death. It highlighted the long-lasting impact of the drug culture that had surrounded the king of rock and roll. Marvin Blizzard's persistence and the actions of Shelby County officials kept the questions alive, ensuring that the truth about Elvis's death would not be easily buried. As the last pages of this book turn, the story of Elvis Presley and the people around him comes to a close. Dr. Jerry Francisco, one of the key figures in the autopsy and determination of Elvis's cause of death, played a significant role in the legal proceedings that followed. His testimony and expertise were crucial in the hearings and depositions that sought to uncover the truth about Elvis's final days. Elvis's death was a tragic event that left a deep impact on his fans and the people who knew him personally. The investigation into his death involved numerous medical professionals, including Dr. George Nishapoulos, who was Elvis's primary physician and faced charges for his role in prescribing large quantities of drugs. Nishapoulos's involvement in Elvis's life and his subsequent legal troubles became a focal point in the public's understanding of the singer's decline and ultimate demise. The media played a significant role in shaping public opinion. The Memphis Commercial Appeal and other local newspapers covered the events surrounding Elvis's death in great detail, providing a window into the complex web of relationships and legal battles that followed. The coverage highlighted the various angles of the story, from the medical aspects to the personal and business dealings that influenced Elvis's life. Elvis's family, including his father Viranernan, his mother Gladys, and his daughter Lisa Marie, were deeply affected by his passing. Their personal stories and their interactions with the people around Elvis, such as Colonel Tom Parker and Dr. Nishapoulos, add a human dimension to the narrative. The book also touches on the legacy of Elvis, not just as a musical icon, but as a person whose life and death continue to be a subject of fascination and debate. In the end, the book serves as a comprehensive examination of the events that led to Elvis's death and the aftermath. It provides a detailed look at the people, the legal proceedings, and the media coverage that shaped the public's understanding of one of the most iconic figures in American pop culture. The story of Elvis's final days is a poignant reminder of the complexities and challenges that often accompany fame and success.